In recent years, many countries such as the UK, France, and Russia have experimented with deploying armed helicopters on their naval vessels. However, for the US helicopter forces, the division between branches has always been quite clear. The Army operates helicopters like the Little Bird and Apache, while the Navy has developed a series of helicopters based on the Sea Stallion platform. At a glance, one can easily distinguish between naval and Army helicopters, as there seems to have never been any overlap between the two. The idea of deploying a powerful Army attack helicopter on naval warships has never appeared to be part of their considerations. However, in reality, the US military once seriously contemplated putting Army armed helicopters on naval warships. In the 1980s, the US planned to deploy AH-64 Apache attack helicopters on warships under a program called Sea Apache. So, what exactly was this plan, and what led it to become one of the more ironic chapters in the history of US weapons development? Let's explore this ambitious yet challenging project. First and foremost, deploying Army attack helicopters on warships offered some significant advantages, with the most important being operational uniformity. If both the Army and Navy used the same type of helicopter, it would enhance standardization and interchangeability across the entire military. Whether in combat training or in designing, manufacturing, and producing spare parts, a unified equipment platform would help reduce costs and shorten training time. So why didn't the US Navy adopt the AH-64 Apache attack helicopter? The story traces back to the cancellation of the AH-56 Cheyenne attack helicopter project in 1972. In terms of technical specifications, the AH-56 Cheyenne remains advanced even by today's standards. However, the problem with the Cheyenne was that it was too ahead of its time. The US Air Force at the time believed that most military aircraft should be operated by the Air Force. If the Army developed such a sophisticated combat aircraft on its own, it would infringe upon the Air Force's authority. However, the Army had its own concerns. Some officials feared that the US Air Force did not prioritize close air support missions and that its response time was too long, roughly 30 minutes. By the time Air Force planes arrived on the battlefield, Army troops could have already perished. According to the Key West Agreement of 1948, the US Army was not allowed to operate fixed-wing aircraft. Although the AH-56 Cheyenne was fundamentally a helicopter, its fixed-wing design enhanced flight speed and weapon-carrying capabilities. This alarmed the US Air Force, which saw the Cheyenne as a potential threat to its domain and lobbied the Pentagon to intervene. After much back-and-forth debate, the Army, with its comparatively weaker influence, ultimately lost to the Air Force and was forced to cancel the AH-56 Cheyenne development project. Eventually, both sides reached an agreement. Ground attack missions would be handled by the Air Force's A-10 and the Marine Corps' AV-8A Harrier. However, even after signing the agreement, the Army continued its search for a dedicated anti-tank attack helicopter that would remain entirely under Army command. By the end of 1972, the Army issued a requirement for an advanced attack helicopter, even ranking it among its top 5 priority projects. By 1976, Hughes Aircraft won the contract with the AH-64 prototype. It was later officially designated as the AH-64 Apache, marking the beginning of an attack helicopter legend. How effective was the AH-64? The answer was evident in the US military's continued demand for it. Even after 48 years in 2024, Boeing was still producing 82 AH-64E helicopters annually. The sustained mass production of the AH-64 Apache for decades is a testament to its exceptional performance and advanced capabilities. With such power, it was only natural that the US Navy and Marine Corps also wanted a share. At the time, the US Marine Corps was operating the AH-1J Sea Cobra, an armed helicopter with a maximum takeoff weight of less than 6 tons, 4 tons lighter than the Apache. This weight difference significantly impacted its weapon's payload and flight endurance. But most importantly, the AH-1J was only equipped with a basic optical sighting system, whereas the Apache boasted cutting-edge technology, including a laser rangefinder, an advanced FLIR infrared targeting system, and a dedicated fire control and targeting system for gunners. When Marine Corps personnel witnessed the Apache's capabilities, they were immediately drawn to it. Comparing the AH-1J to the Apache was akin to comparing an old truck to a high-performance sports car. As soon as the Apache entered Army service, the Marine Corps quickly approached Hughes Aircraft, seeking to develop a naval variant. They hoped to modify the Apache for shipborne operations, replacing the AH-1JC Cobra. Thus, the Sea Apache project was born. But this raised a crucial question. If the Sea Apache was so impressive, why did neither the Navy nor the Marine Corps ultimately procure it? Let's delve deeper into the reasons behind the cancellation of this highly promising project. The Sea Apache project was also known as Grey Thunder. According to the initial concept proposed by the US Navy, this helicopter would be deployed on medium and small warships, serving as a versatile aircraft capable of taking off from amphibious assault ships or helicopter carriers to provide fire support for the Marine Corps. Since these fleets often operated beyond the protective range of carrier strike groups, the Sea Apache was also envisioned as a temporary air defense platform, carrying short-range air-to-air missiles to protect smaller warships. In 1984, Hughes Helicopters, by then a part of McDonnell Douglas, began researching the feasibility of adapting the Apache for naval deployment at the request of the US Navy and Marine Corps. Since maritime combat conditions differ significantly from land operations, the Sea Apache had to undergo a series of modifications while still being based on the Army's AH-64A platform. Engineers proposed 3 different versions, all utilizing the same General Electric T700 engine as the AH-64. However, to adapt to the marine environment, the Sea Apache was enhanced with corrosion-resistant materials, improved electromagnetic interference shielding, an upgraded Doppler pulse navigation system, additional exhaust outlets, and an automatic blade folding mechanism for easy storage in the LAMPS aircraft hangars aboard warships. The 3 versions of the Sea Apache and their technical challenges. First version, a promising start but stability issues. The first version of the Sea Apache retained the structure of the AH-64A, but added a folding tail and integrated an air-to-air radar mounted on a mast above the main rotor. Additionally, it was optimized to carry Harpoon anti-ship missiles and Sidewinder air-to-air missiles. However, as testing progressed, a series of critical issues emerged. The most apparent flaw was the narrow stance of the main landing gear. While this wasn't a significant problem on land, it became a serious liability when operating on the deck of a warship in rough seas. The helicopter was prone to tipping over upon landing, especially in turbulent conditions where the ship's deck continuously rocked and swayed with the waves. To resolve this issue, McDonnell Douglas engineers redesigned the landing gear by moving the main wheels from the fuselage to the stub wings. This adjustment widened the landing stance, greatly improving stability during deck landings. Additionally, when not in use, the landing gear could be retracted into the wings to reduce aerodynamic drag during flight. Second version, removing the rotor-mounted radar and focusing on aerodynamics. In the second version of the Sea Apache, Hughes Helicopters engineers decided to eliminate the rotor-mounted radar and instead integrate it into the helicopter's nose section. This modification reduced aerodynamic drag and improved flight stability. However, relocating the radar introduced a new challenge. Its scanning range was now more limited compared to when it was mounted atop the main rotor. Numerous other refinements were proposed, yet the most pressing question remained. Despite its meticulous design, why did the Sea Apache ultimately fail to secure orders from the US Navy and Marine Corps? Let's continue exploring the reasons that led to the cancellation of this highly promising project. In the second version of the Sea Apache, to accommodate the nose-mounted radar, engineers decided to remove the 30mm chain gun located under the fuselage. This led to a significant redesign of the helicopter's front section. The side pontoons were extended to provide additional space for electronic equipment and extra fuel. Additionally, 2 AIM-9L Sidewinder air-to-air missiles could be mounted on short pylons under the fuselage. The third version of the Sea Apache featured even more drastic modifications. The side pontoons were completely removed to make room for a larger nose-mounted radar, specifically the AH-64 system, the same radar used in the FA-18 Hornet fighter. This system was capable of ground scanning with 16 different modes, tracking up to 10 targets simultaneously and engaging 8 targets at once. Its maximum detection range extended up to 300 kilometers. After multiple rounds of upgrades, the Sea Apache had evolved into something almost unrecognizable from the original AH-64 Apache. Each version was designed to accommodate a diverse arsenal, including AIM-120 AMRAAM air-to-air missiles, AIM-9 Sidewinder, FIM-92 Stinger, Harpoon anti-ship missiles, Hellfire anti-tank missiles, and FFAR rockets. The US Navy also specified operational requirements for the Sea Apache, including a range of 370 kilometers and an endurance of 4 hours in the air. The Navy versus Marine Corps dispute: radar or night targeting systems. When the 3 upgraded versions of the Sea Apache were submitted for review, a sharp disagreement immediately erupted between the US Navy and the Marine Corps. The Navy strongly favored the third version, equipped with the powerful ANAP-G65 radar, as it would transform the Sea Apache into a multi-role reconnaissance and combat platform capable of supporting naval task forces in air defense and anti-ship operations. However, the Marine Corps was opposed to this idea. They argued that the ANAP-G65 radar was excessive for their operational needs. Instead, they prioritized retaining the pilot's night vision system, the FLIR infrared targeting system, and the ability to launch Hellfire anti-tank missiles. These features were crucial for enhancing close air support capabilities and improving situational awareness on the battlefield. The core issue, however, was that the nose section of the helicopter could only accommodate one primary system. If the Marine Corps insisted on keeping the optical and infrared sensors, there would be no space left to install the ANAP-G65 reconnaissance radar that the Navy desired. A potential alternative was mounting the radar atop the main rotor, a design that would later be implemented on the AH-64D Longbow Apache. Another point of contention was the Marine Corps' insistence on retaining the ability to carry Hellfire missiles, a requirement that conflicted with the Navy's emphasis on air defense roles. These conflicting priorities left the future of the Sea Apache more uncertain than ever. The integration of Hellfire missiles into the Sea Apache continued to face obstacles, as Hellfire was an Army-exclusive weapon at the time and had never been adopted by the Navy or Marine Corps. This meant that if the Sea Apache were to use Hellfire missiles, the Navy's logistics system would face significant challenges in supplying and maintaining them. To resolve this issue, Hughes Helicopters came up with a rather ingenious idea. If the Marine Corps didn't have Hellfire but was already using TOW anti-tank missiles on their AH-1W Super Cobra helicopters, why not replace the Hellfire with TOW? They decided to borrow Bell Helicopter's design and equip the Sea Apache with 2 4-tube TOW missile launchers. This solution allowed the Sea Apache to retain its anti-tank capability while ensuring logistical compatibility with Marine Corps units. While the anti-tank missile issue was temporarily resolved, another conflict arose. With the underwing weapon stations now occupied by TOW missiles, the helicopter's nose section had enough space to accommodate the ANAP-G65 radar as the Navy had requested. This seemed like a minor victory. The Navy was satisfied, and while the Marine Corps was not particularly enthusiastic, they reluctantly accepted the compromise. However, it was well understood that the Marine Corps had far less influence than the Navy when it came to budget allocation, leaving them with little say in the matter. But before they could celebrate, the US Navy once again changed its requirements. Following President Ronald Reagan's efforts to expand and modernize the Navy, an influx of funding led to even greater ambitions for the Sea Apache. Now, they no longer wanted just a navalized attack helicopter. They envisioned transforming the Sea Apache into a super multi-role helicopter capable of executing a wide range of missions, including protecting amphibious assault ships carrying Harpoon anti-ship missiles to attack enemy warships, carrying AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles for air patrol and fighter interception, providing fire support for SEAL teams during special operations, conducting long-range reconnaissance and surveillance, performing beyond visual range attacks against enemy fleets. These demands placed the engineers at McDonnell Douglas, MSD, in an increasingly difficult position. What started as a project to develop an attack helicopter for maritime operations had now morphed into an all-encompassing combat platform, practically a mini stealth fighter hovering over the ocean. Faced with the Navy's increasingly unrealistic expectations, the engineering team could do little more than shake their heads in frustration. Some even joked that if the Apache was really that powerful, the US Navy wouldn't need to build more aircraft carriers, just produce 10,000 Apaches, load them onto warships, and crush the Soviet fleet into submission. While the Navy continued to pile on new demands, the Marine Corps grew impatient and approached McDonnell Douglas to ask when the Sea Apache would finally be delivered. The engineers could only respond with a wry smile, "We can't deliver it anymore." Go ask your Navy. With so many conflicting requirements and a lack of clear direction, the Sea Apache project ultimately stalled. Meanwhile, both the Navy and Marine Corps gradually realized that trying to turn an attack helicopter like the Apache into an all-encompassing maritime combat platform was simply impractical. By the late 1980s, the Sea Apache project was quietly cancelled. The Marine Corps opted to continue using the AH-1 Super Cobra and later transitioned to the AH-1Z Viper, a more practical and lightweight solution that better suited maritime operations. Meanwhile, the US Navy returned to fixed-wing aircraft and alternative close-range defense systems. Looking back at the development of the Sea Apache, one could argue that it failed due to excessive expectations and unrealistic ambitions. Had the focus remained on a few specific missions rather than attempting to cram in every conceivable capability, the Sea Apache might have had a real chance of becoming part of today's US Navy. When Marine Corps representatives reviewed the list of requirements proposed by the Navy, they were stunned. It became abundantly clear that the Navy had little interest in the Marine Corps' actual needs. Beyond just equipping the Sea Apache with the ANAPG-65 radar, the Navy also wanted it to have anti-ship capabilities with Harpoon missiles, air defense with AIM-9 Sidewinders, and even long-range interception using AIM-120 AMR AAMs. In short, the Navy wanted to transform the Sea Apache into a comprehensive combat platform capable of both air defense and anti-ship warfare. But this was completely incompatible with the Marine Corps' operational needs. One Marine Corps officer, upon seeing the proposed plans, couldn't contain his frustration. "We need a helicopter to provide fire support when we land on the beach. And what do you guys expect us to use? A Harpoon missile? Are you planning to fire it at the shore?" Furthermore, while the Apache was an exceptionally powerful helicopter, no amount of modification could make it comparable to a fixed-wing aircraft. When facing enemy fighters, the Sea Apache would still have to rely on support from carrier-based FA-18 Hornets. So, was it really logical for the Navy to demand that the Sea Apache take on both air defense suppression and anti-ship warfare? The debate between the Navy and the Marine Corps dragged on for years. By 1989, both sides finally reached a compromise. They completed the conceptual design of the Sea Apache, agreeing that if sufficient funding was allocated, prototype production could begin. However, just as the project was about to enter the prototype manufacturing phase, a major issue emerged. Where would the funding for the Sea Apache come from? After numerous design revisions, the Sea Apache had evolved far beyond the original AH-64. Apart from a few core components, most of its electronics and weapon systems had been completely overhauled. In reality, it had become an entirely new helicopter, featuring cutting-edge technology that was nearly impossible to implement at the time. This also meant that the research and production costs for the Sea Apache would be extraordinarily high. And just then, the Soviet Union began to collapse. With the Cold War threat rapidly fading, the US Congress immediately moved to slash defense spending. With funding no longer as easy to secure, the Navy suddenly became much more cautious with its budgeting. So, the Navy turned to the Marine Corps, demanding they share the development costs. But by this point, the Marine Corps had had enough of the Navy's constant changes and unrealistic demands. One Marine officer bluntly refused. "You were the ones who demanded upgrades. You were the ones who kept adding new requirements. And now you expect us to pay for it? Keep dreaming." Although the Marine Corps is technically part of the Navy, everyone knows that it has the smallest budget of any US military branch. A famous joke among Marines goes, "Our squad only has one pair of pants to share. Whoever's on guard duty gets to wear them." And now, the Navy expected them to help pay for a helicopter that had been redesigned entirely based on the Navy's own demands? It was absurd. With no one willing to compromise on funding, the Sea Apache project stalled indefinitely. Lacking financial support, it was officially cancelled. The Marine Corps continued using the AH-1 Super Cobra and later transitioned to the AH-1Z Viper, both of which were better suited for amphibious assault support. Meanwhile, the Navy abandoned the idea of equipping attack helicopters altogether, instead relying on fixed-wing aircraft like the FA-18 and shipboard defense systems for their operational needs. The story of the Sea Apache serves as a textbook example of how a military project can be strangled by excessive ambition, internal conflicts, and shifting geopolitical realities. What could have been a formidable naval weapon ultimately became nothing more than an unfinished dream, existing only on paper. While the Navy and Marine Corps continued shifting responsibility, the Soviet Union took its final breath. With the primary threat gone, defense budgets were slashed, and with them, the Sea Apache project was officially terminated. Today, the US Marine Corps still operates an upgraded version of the AH-1W Super Cobra, the AH-1Z Viper. While the Viper has seen significant improvements, it still lags behind the Apache in terms of firepower, sensors, and battlefield survivability. It's fair to say that if the Sea Apache had been successfully developed, the Marine Corps would have had a far more formidable attack helicopter at its disposal. However, while the Sea Apache itself died, the concept of deploying attack helicopters on warships lived on. Today, the British military has successfully operated Apache helicopters from their amphibious assault ships. Despite undergoing no major modifications from the standard version, the fact that Apache helicopters can operate from naval vessels validates the feasibility of the idea. In a way, we could say that a true Sea Apache does exist, except it belongs to Britain, not the US. Though it failed, the Sea Apache remains an important lesson in weapons development. Too much ambition can cause even the most promising projects to collapse before they ever get off the ground.